start the last substantive session of the day, as I was forewarning the panelists that any questions that our audience has not asked and has gathered during the day, they might be firing out. So absolutely do that. So we have the largest panel for today, and let me start out by asking our colleagues to introduce themselves. I think that'd be a good way, and then also in doing that, also giving an overview of kind of, if you'd have to give a general state of play to this question that we have on the panel, cooperation with FinTechs. We heard a bit of this earlier in the days. We were discussing open banking, and of course in the introductory presentations by Jits and by Marty from the SEB Bank. So over to you.
Thank you. Can I just clarify, you want me to introduce the role and also the general positions Swedbank has to FinTechs?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Jonas Lagerstedt. I'm head of what we call the FinTech office, which means that it's a coordinating function for everything we do related to FinTech, artificial intelligence, and digital automation. So these three areas under one umbrella. And we do that because we think these areas are closely related. There are a lot of fintech companies in the fields of automation and artificial intelligence. We also think that what we need to do in these areas, it's relevant for all parts of the bank, so it makes sense to have it in coordinated under one roof in the bank. It's a new function. It's new since beginning of December. So that's me. And the role, given Swedbank and FinTechs, I think you've heard a bit already. You heard Hans in the previous session here talking about our bot. Geertz and Emma has been here before talking about a few things. So I wasn't here, unfortunately, so I'm not sure if I'm kind of repeating what they already said. Not yet. No, that's good. So there is still a chance. Well, generally, I think we are extremely positive to FinTechs and FinTech collaborations and new technologies. We think that, those days when we as a bank could rely on captive solutions and our own capabilities, they are gone since long. We will get a much better development if we work with, many players in many different fields, and really, our core capability is to learn how to collaborate, how to work with these players in a good way. Small, medium-sized, and large. I mean, it's not really the maturity or the size of the organization that matters. It's really what they can provide. We have one focus, which is customer benefit. We want to make sure that our customers get the best services that you can get. And that kind of is the guiding star for everything we do in this field. And I would like to emphasize that it's not only services, applications, collaborations related to the customer interface. It's just as well a lot in the back end in order to make all processes more straight through, more better customer experience all the way through.
What was the rationale for the FinTech office in December? That's quite new.
Yeah, it's quite new. I think it was because we felt in the bank that what we needed to do and what we were doing in these areas, it increased in scale. So it started to pop up every here and there, and we needed to make sure that we actually do it the right way. And of course, there's also a lot of regulation compliance related issues. So putting requirements on knowing what we're doing and why.
Great. Okay. So over to you.
I'll make use of this one, I think. Hello, everyone. Good to be here. My name is Kristina Soderberg. I work at SEB Venture Capital. It's been around a bit longer than December, almost 25 years, actually. So it's the investment arm of SEB. It started out on a very small scale, and today we have it's an evergreen fund of about 2 billion Swedish crowns that we can invest in startups. We've done so for quite some time, a bit over 100 investments. To date, we have a portfolio of about 20 companies, and 8 out of them are FinTechs. But it's only actually for the last 2 years that we've been focusing on FinTech investments. So it's been a sort of a new journey for me as well to look into technology that can serve the financial services. It could either be, just like you say, something that will help the bank to be more cost efficient. I think when we talk about blockchain later on, that will be one of those aspects. But also investing into companies that do the innovation that the banks don't have time to do while they're getting quite harsh demands on their regulation side. So that's what I do. We're a team of 7 people working with investments, and it's all about, of course, identifying, establishing relations with the startups, and eventually to make the investment, and then we work on the boards together with these companies, and that's how we get to know them, and as part of sort of the learning side for SEB as well.
So 100 in total over 25 years. How many active in portfolio right now?
So the active portfolio now is about 20 companies.
Not all FinTech.
No, 8 of them are FinTech.
Okay.
But I work with both those. And the legacy from us is doing more deep tech investments. So last year I sold a company to Microsoft. Some years before that we sold a company to Cisco. So it's a bit of a different. And I think that's also interesting when we talk about the FinTech sector. It's sort of just popped up, the FinTech definition that we have today. And many of them are very focused on innovation when it comes to customer experience. They're taking a solution that the banks can offer already today, but make it more digitalized. They can do it cheaper because they don't have the legacy costs. While as our team have been sort of more searching for this more deep tech solutions when we come to AI and solutions that can be used more for making the banks more cost efficient. And I think, and we also see when it comes to the flow of companies that we look into, that it's also changing from being more app dominated to being more of a important technology for the banks going forward. So that's interesting to see.
We'll take forward in more detail. So Kim, yeah, we have the second mic.
Yeah. So is this?
It will work as you start talking.
Great. Yeah, it works. I just need to be very close to it. So my name is Kim Lazars. I work as a product owner for the mobile application for SEB, mainly targeted at consumers. So in essence, I'm sure many of you are familiar with agile development. We have a severe backlog of things that we want to accomplish. And in that backlog, we have elements from all sides of the organization. So we have payments, loans, finance products, anything. And as we look into our backlog, we have so many different ideas coming from everywhere, basically. We have FinTechs providing ideas. For instance, Tink, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit more later. We also have the innovations that comes from within SEB. So my job is really to make sure that we prioritize correct and that we go along with the right thing we need to do at the moment, basically. So when we assess what we need to do, we work from a model which is based on 4 dimensions. We put the customer in the center, and then we work our way through helping the customer to see their financial situation and their economic activity, to understand and make sense of that, and further on to come up with a suggestion for a decision. What do you want to achieve? What is it that you want with your financial situation? And finally, give them the tools to act upon that. And when we look at FinTech collaborations, they can really help us out in that model. That is the core mission for SEB Digital Banking, to be able to provide that see, understand, decide, and act. And to be able to really help the customer. And using FinTechs, I'm going to go into Tink just a little bit here, and the data they can provide. They can really make that experience a complete new one. So as we mentioned before, I see very positive. I think that we have great opportunities to continue working in that path when we're able to deliver some sort of added value, or a lot of added value, onto our own core services, basically, using a collaboration. I think we're going to see more of that, very much more of that.
Okay, great. So, Yuri, over to you.
Hello, my name is Yuri Laur. I represent LHV Bank here, but essentially I'm not a banker. My background is Silicon Valley giants, really. Like Kurt's referenced earlier this morning, they are coming. So my previous position was at Microsoft, and they were tackling India 3 years ago. So that's pretty much done by now, I'm sure. So they are coming pretty soon. So that's a warning to you all. But in terms of what LHV is doing with FinTechs, I think there's 3 pillars, really. One of them is firstly that we are a FinTech ourselves, even though we're a bank. So it's not based only because I have brave choice in sock colors, but it's based on the fact that more than 30% of our staff is IT today, and this is full-time employees. With contractors, the percentage is probably much, much higher. So it's fully technology-driven. Also, we've been able to keep our staff numbers below 400 for a number of years now, and this is by choice, because we choose to escalate and scale our business through technology rather than people. The same goes for branches. We still operate 2 branches. There's no need for us to only operate 2 branches. It's a knowing choice, because we want to service our customers first and foremostly through digital platforms. It used to be internet bank, now it's mobile. The only physical presence that we are expanding is the ATM network, and even that is more like a promotional activity rather than a need itself. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is we do collaborate. As a small bank, there are areas where we are very good at, and there are areas, where we aren't that good. So there's a couple of different service providers we use from FinTech sector. So we have a long-term partnership with a company called TransferWise, you've probably heard of. So we were, I think, the first bank who integrated TransferWise international payments into the internet bank. Sure, we might have lost a couple of euros on the transaction fees because we're not charging for the service. It's fully just integrated for the usage of our customers. But we feel it's worth it. We do have a artificial intelligence chatbot ourselves. It's a he, by the way. He's called Uku. He's not the brightest yet. We've just started training him last year, but he's doing great work on becoming a much better service channel. So right now he lives in Facebook chat, but we're looking to expand him to other channels as well. Recently, we had the opportunity to onboard customers through video. So we partnered with a company called The Riff, who helps us onboard through video chat, and where they do biometric tracking of the faces, etc. So we do use those components and collaborate with these companies, which is a different task at sometimes, but maybe I'll talk about that a little later. And thirdly, we also provide infrastructure to FinTechs. So it's funny, so with TransferWise, for example, where we consume their services, we also provide them infrastructure for their euro payments. And not only for them, we have a portfolio of companies whom we provide infrastructure services for. And for that specific reason, we've opening a branch in the UK this year in London to service FinTechs only. So infrastructure offering, euro payments, pound payments.
Yeah, Katrin?
Yes, today we have had a really very lively discussion, and it has been focused on how to cooperate in the best way with the FinTechs. We have heard and seen the very nice examples of the new services and products developed by the banks and as large FinTech companies themselves, or the new services that are a result of very good cooperation, or which are in the pipeline and coming very soon. But so far, we can say that there are various possible models of cooperation. My question to all the panelists is that so far we haven't heard anything about cooperation between the banks itself. What is your attitude? Is this something that you are looking for? Is it possible? Is it on the pipeline already? What is your experience and what are your expectations?
Good. So I think... Yep.
Should I go first with the mic? I think it's a very interesting area. There is, there are always ideas, discussions between the banks on how we can collaborate in various areas, specifically around, in the FinTech space. Maybe I'm not aware of any, specific ones we can mention here, but I would expect there will be more and more of that, because I think collaboration as such is going to be, or is already very, very important also between the banks. And I can imagine, like, the banks have collaborated around the bank gyro, around the UC, around,
UC, bank gyro. Might spell out a bit for the audience here.
So there are many traditionally in Swedish and Nordic banking. There are companies, that are utilities for the bank, where the banks collaborate, because they are not typically differentiating the competitiveness of the banks, but it's a good way to share your infrastructure. I think it will probably, even going forward, be difficult for banks to collaborate in the customer interface, because that's where we compete. But in terms of the what is infrastructure, we could definitely do it. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't want to mention any specific area right now.
And I can just echo that. I mean, just like you mentioned, we have the information UC, where they provide banks with information about the companies and the payment systems that we have in Sweden, and also now quite recently Swish, when the banks came together to say that we individuals, but also to companies, we can pay using our mobile phones connected to the mobile number that we have, and that's done between the banks and also the bank ID, which is how we identify ourselves more and more in Sweden. So I think the Swedish banks have proven very well. It would be interesting to hear how it actually works in the various Baltic countries. If you have, I know that both our banks are fairly available there, but do you have a comment?
Maybe you can more comment on this switch system, because we know that this works well between Nordic countries. But what about the opportunities for other countries, for example, for Baltics?
So let's start with explaining to those who don't know what the switch system is, and then Swish, and then proceed to answer the question.
I don't know if I'm the sort of technical expert of the product or solution as such, but I think that in general it's a problem for these banks combined solutions that we have. For example, the Swish, where you just use your phone to transfer money to your friends, or also when you're in a shop you can use your phone to just transfer money directly to that company bank account. But both when it comes to Swish, but also Bank ID, their mission is not to solve solutions or problems outside of, as I understand and had some discussion as well, outside of the sort of home market, which I think is a bit of a pity, because if you, just like any fintech, if you will survive as being the most and best used solution, you have to be able to also provide that solution into other markets. Otherwise, at some point, they will come, if that's a Microsoft, or if that's a Samsung, or whoever it might be, or another fintech, they will, of course, try to conquer the whole market with such a solution. So I think it's a bit of pity that today, at least, it seems like both the Swish solution and the Bank ID solution is going to stay within the Swedish borders. I don't know if, for example, in Norway, they have several Swish solutions, which sort of, if you don't have one and single one, then it doesn't really make sense. The whole point is that everybody, and there was no marketing made, and just within, now it's been a few years, but more or less everybody uses it. It's,
Mm-hmm.
all ages.
I guess part of the answer is that maybe Jirts or Ilya can add is the instant payment solution in the case of Latvia, given that we're in the Eurozone, right? So that's part of the answer. Now, you're not yet, the discussions are that you might be in the Eurozone. So I don't know if we might take that one on the side. Yeah.
I think his answer on Swish is that it's not kind of relevant because SEP instant payments are coming to Baltics or Eurozone. This is one. And Bank ID, yes, this was first thing we tried to bring Bank ID to Baltics, and it was not possible because of ownership structure, because there are banks who are owners who are presented in Baltics, and then there are banks who are not presented in Baltics, and those who are not were actually blocking it. So.
Okay.
Simple, exact.
But I'd actually like to come back to Christina, and I'll ask her specifically to talk about one of the investments that the SEB venture have made and are participating in, the R3, which is a blockchain consortium of quite a large number of banks, and maybe talking through what is the idea, how is that number of banks has come together, and where are we from the concept to potential deployment on that particular solution?
Yeah, that's a really interesting collaboration investment or project, or what you would call it. So I actually came back from maternity leave end of summer 2015, and then all of this sort of FinTech, blockchain, Bitcoin, everybody started talking about things that I hadn't heard that much about before. And then more or less at the same time, SEB joined something called R3, becoming the member of this. So I think there were about 10 or 11 member banks that started supporting this idea of establishing and developing a platform for blockchain-based infrastructure for the banks. And they are more or less addressing, I mean, various areas within the bank. And to sort of respond to the last aspect of the question, we yet haven't seen, I would say, the sort of any final technical solution that banks are implementing yet. But there are lots of interesting use cases. And I was in London now earlier this autumn, and you see that there is a lot of interest and attention from all the banks. So eventually it took a year later, and then about 40 banks decided to join in, and
40,
yeah, exactly.
Global, European?
Global, so all the way from South America, North America, Asia, Europe, Australia. So it was quite interesting to be on those weekly calls with the lawyers to make 40 banks agree on something versus then the founders and the team of this quite a sort of high-fly venture. But so far so good, I must say. It's sort of the reasoning why SEB decided to join was that we wanted to explore how blockchain technology could actually help us in the future, and this was a very good way of doing it. So now we're actually on the board of that company. It's Paula da Silva, who is head of transaction services within SEB. And lots of people within SEB is engaged in supporting the different use cases. And
what are the different use cases? Maybe you can try to talk us through a few.
Yeah, not sure if I can elaborate on all of them, but and different banks work on different use cases. So it's very driven by the individual members and investors, what they want to get out of this partnership, and what they want them to focus on when they build the platform. So we've been working on fund settlements. We're working on smart contracts. We've been working on, I know we've done a Ripple, which is not R3, so it's not that just because we invest into one case, we're not going to try other providers. Ripple, Ethereum, and Fabric Hyperledger is also other providers of blockchain-based technology. But how Corda, that's the name of R3's product, how they stand out is because they can manage to keep information private. I mean, the whole thing with the blockchain is to make it centralized and make the information available for everybody, while as we all know that bank information should not be available for everybody. So that's what R3 have managed to focus on, and actually to solve that issue. So if there is a transaction, it's between me and Jonas, we can make sure that not everybody sees the details of that transaction. So that's sort of that's worth remembering when you sort of look into the different technological solutions of I would say the four main providers that we have today, at least.
Mm-hmm. So R3 then with all the smart contracts and the clearing and the settlement processes is working on a global legislation level. So in other words, that's a bit of a challenge for our policymakers to understand where do we fit in with the regulations we are. So in terms of or is this London-based regulations that are currently being taken as the basis? How do you see that evolving?
I think that they today develop solutions for some solutions can be more global, whereas other ones have to be more local geographically. So that's of course also the challenge, and I think that's what we hopefully will get to see during 2018, how these are connected into the actual systems. It's one thing to just try out making payments using Ripple, for example, or using the Corda, but to make it work every day, every minute of the hour.
Yeah, so I guess one of the
challenge.
As you're saying, one of the key problems that the R3 and similar ones are setting out to do is to solve the transborder, cross-border payments issues. So maybe our colleague from LHV wants to come in here on a specific example, as Katrin asked.
Sure. I mean, one of the collaborations with TransferWise I mentioned earlier does tackle the international payments issue, let's say. There's a lot of people who are solving it right now, so I'm not really sure it's an issue anymore, to be honest. I think there are way bigger issues already, and the market is getting kind of chopped up already by different players. But it was a good timing for us because of the Deutsche Bank de-risking itself from the Baltic countries. For smaller banks, USD became a problem, and at least we had the TransferWise solution at hand to enable our customers to pay out in USD and in other, well, not so exotic currencies compared to USD. So that was a good example for us. But I think another topic that we haven't touched on is that with FinTechs, there's also comes some burden when you work with FinTechs, right? So if you take a FinTech company and use it as a part of your business process, there's bound to be some issues. So it's not for the faint of heart. So I've been dealing with some very odd issues in the past. So a couple of examples. We run our own cryptocurrency projects as well. So in one situation, I've had to move our development team from a war zone to a non-war zone, which happened during the Ukrainian conflict. So they were in Donbass. We had to relocate them because, well, there was a war outside. We've had companies pivot mid-product launch. Basically, I think working with a FinTech is a bit like hiring a millennial. It's at some point they're brilliant. They pick up things really fast. It's going really well, and then they decide to start a vegan bakery in Indonesia, and they just disappear. So you always have to kind of work with them and keep an eye on them and make sure you have a backup plan. So it's kind of my word of advice, because we've used FinTechs for different aspects in our business, and you still have to make sure that the core business areas are covered, so you wouldn't run into any major troubles. And there are simpler things like business processes change and no one bothers to notify you, stuff like that. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Actually brings us nicely to what we discussed with Kim in preparation. So maybe taking us through some of these examples from the concept stage to the actual deployment stage on a mass scale.
Exactly. When I recognize a lot of what you're saying on your experiences. Fortunately, Tink is located in Stockholm. It's a team. When we started working with them, they were not so big. They were quite small. So we definitely had to think about the fact that we need a backup plan. We need to know what's going to happen in case we... Yeah? What is Tink? Tink. Yeah, maybe I should go into what Tink really is. Yeah. So Tink is an application. They launched an application and a platform for transactional analysis. So basically, they take all your transactions in all your accounts and put a category on them. And through that category, you can fetch information on your spending, on your saving, or on your budget. If you want to set a saving goal, they have so many different use cases. But it's really information inside the transaction. and that is very interesting for us. So when we started to look at, I think before my time working with this, we actually tried this out ourselves at one point in time. We tried making an iPad application, trying to analyze all the transactions we have, put categories on them, provide a sort of insight into another sort of insight into your financial situations that goes beyond your current balance and your transactions. When we did that, we kind of liked it, but we did it small scale. But when we saw the functionality within Tink, we were thinking, okay, how are we going to approach this? We can approach this in 2 different ways. We knew that they had spoken to ABN AMRO at that time. And ABN AMRO had launched an application in Holland called GRIP. I don't know, and they taught me how to pronounce that. It's GRIP, but I thought it was grip first, get a grip. They launched that as a standalone application for 10,000 customers. If you try it out, see what they liked. When we looked at the offer of transactional analysis, we faced that this kind of insight in our see, understand, decide, act model would fit very well to integrate into our core offer. So we look at our core offer and say, okay, which are our segments in using our mobile application for private customers? And we quickly realized that when we compare that to the Tink application, our customers are maybe not as advanced. They have so many different use cases, as I mentioned, like budgets, tagging, a lot of stuff that maybe a more tech-savvy part of the population would appreciate, or someone who liked to get a hold of that. So when we're trying to work out the concept on how we're going to use their technology, we scale it down, actually. And we try to break it into pieces. They have like 50 different categories. We chose 9 different expense categories to just place in our application through a lot of service design and prototyping. See, is there any category the customers lack? Is there anything they want added? And sure enough, as soon as we launched the 9 category expense chart, which is currently in our application, the first question was, when can I get my own categories? When can I make it myself? But it's very, when we launched, it was very, very appreciated as well. So I think that when we take on a technology platform and try to adapt that into our current offering, especially we want to integrate that into our core interface, which is our mobile app, the most common interface faced by our customers. We need to really consider the way we build trust for those applications. So if we were to launch everything at once, I think some people would have liked it, but half of them would have never been used for the first 2 years probably, because we need to make sure that we onboard our customers in a good customer journey to all the potential use cases we can have on that platform. And by doing that, we can also look at other use cases. Is there any part of the Tink data we can use on a different scale? And that is something we looked a bit through the innovation lab. Because when you look at your economy, any economic activity is basically a reflection of how you view the world. So when we look at what we can do, when we look at technology companies outside FinTech, there's so many different companies that can benefit from being paired and cross-referenced against financial data. For instance, carbon emissions is one of them. A lot of our customers are fairly keen on our sustainability principles. And so if we were to cross-reference carbon emissions with basically consumption, we can provide an insight to that. That would be interesting. But it's not really FinTech material, but it's still something we can make FinTech if we like to do that. So we did that in an internal pilot, which is really interesting.
So in terms of practical aspects of working with Tink, did you bring the team fully in-house? Did you use them as vendors? Or how did the cooperation evolve over different stages?
Well, since they were...
No, I'm just going to add that there are 2 aspects. So there is one investment part of it. So we invested in Tink, and we also have this cooperation. And it's actually a 2-way cooperation where we use their technology, in-house our app, and we have offerings in their app.
I do have a question concerning Tink. You were using the information of the transactions of done in SEB only?
Yes, exactly.
Because when we speak about PSD2, then there are two main core services. This is payments and aggregation of information. Have you ever thought, or is it already in the pipeline? The question is to SEB and Swedbank as well, to be the so-called middleman to gather information from the other banks as well and do the work as Tink does for the SEB transactions today.
I think everyone, when reading PSD2, has that kind of idea. I think all banks would are looking into the options of that. Certainly I have, but I don't think we have reached a conclusion in how we want to approach that at the moment. We are fairly confident in the technology platform that Tink delivers to us, and we know what they can do, and that is something we really need to assess going forward. Yeah, they're a really interesting company in that sense, because they are highly adaptive. If I can come into your question, because it kind of touches upon that. I mean, they have a team based in Sweden, so it was sort of a vendor process. They came to our site, we were at their site. They're located not far from here. Together with them and our IT team, we set a small team basically working with all these components, everything from the systems integration to risk onto design of the application. So it was a very intense time for us working with them, for sure. It kind of puts a pressure on the rest of the organization, because as I mentioned before, I work with the backlog of all mobile development. And when we focus a lot of attention on a FinTech, we can learn so much, but at the same time we push aside things that other parts of the organization might want to get out to the market. And this requires the organization to have a buy-in sort of to that. Okay, we're going to make this investment. We want this functionality within our application, and that is a mission. And it was really a relief to see that we were able to make that adjustment fairly quick when we come out, when we try prototyping, and everybody understands what we're doing.
So I guess kind of the question that we'll be getting to, and maybe Jonas can take this one, is how do you actually set up the governance processes? Because you're hitting on a very good point. You have capacity constraints in dealing with X number of FinTech corporations in an active phase at any given time, right? So how do you actually set up the governance processes to be able to do more of this at scale, if this is the future?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and it really, in Swedbank anyway, I think we started to work with FinTechs before we had all these processes in place, and then we learn as we go along. And you realize that, I think Kim not Kim, Jury, you mentioned that working with FinTechs is a little bit like working with millennials, and I think that's true. Yeah, they are, and we've had several meetings where you meet very exciting people and with great ideas, and you could easily think about this as just to do a plug and play if it was only for the functionality and integration into the systems and so on. But the tough part is really, how do we sell this internally? How can we go to take a management decision that we kind of work with these people when we don't know enough about them, when we haven't worked out all the compliance and so on. So what do we do about that? Yeah, we need to first of all, we have discovered that we can't do what we do because we need to have better processes around it. So we need to for different kinds of collaborations and investments and relationships, we need to have different processes that are pre-approved by our risk departments, by compliance and so on. So basically, when we get into a real situation, we know what to do, and all the stakeholders are kind of aligned around that. I think that's how we are going to do it. And there are no doubts that we need to be, we need to think differently than we've done before. There are processes that it can take, 6 months to come up with a yes to a FinTech company, because then they have started to work with so many other players. And typically, in the first meeting with the fintech company, they say, okay, yes, you're interested in our offering, but okay, can you be quick, because we are so have so many adverse experience with banks, so can you be different? And we need to tell them that we can be different because we want to be different. So I think we want a lot. We still need to prove a bit how we can adapt to it, but we are very determined to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in some ways, you're all out there scouting for certain ideas, right? So maybe without going into too much of detail, but if you can give a sense to the audience, which problems are you trying to fix in some ways? Which areas are you trying to look for cooperation partners in, where you see that would be the way to proceed? Because to have pre-approved process, it means you probably have a good sense of the areas you are scouting out.
Yeah, I think we have a dual approach. We have a kind of an outside-in one where the different players come to us. We are part of different communities and so on. But in parallel to that, and maybe even more importantly, we are scrutinizing our offering, the strengths of our customer offering, and identifying the areas where we say, okay, here in these areas, we are unlikely to be able to solve this on our own as fast as we want. So let's go out and target-wise look at who could potentially help us in these areas. I think that's a very important process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What about yourselves? What are the big trends?
It's joint efforts as an organization. So we work from different aspects of it. I mean, we from the venture side, we look both into do strategic investments, like as Tink was a strategic one, where there is both the sort of financial aspect of that. We believe that this can be an exciting company to be owner of, but also there is a cooperation part of it. So that's one. And then we also do traditional just financial investments. So there might not be any cooperation with the bank, but we have at least a white flag to do the investment. So it could even be a competitor, it could be a challenger bank, it could be, anything, as long as we get our board to say yes to that. And our board is actually, most of them sit in the executive board within the bank, so that's good, but also challenging. So we work from one aspect, meeting companies from investment side of view. Many of them nowadays, compared to the companies that we met with 5 years ago that didn't have any interest in the bank, they only came to us because they wanted to use our experience as owners and the capital and our network and so on. But most fintechs today, when they come to us, they also want to. Many of them, either they just want to learn more from the bank, how it actually works, and in most cases, they also want to have a cooperation with the bank, at least when it comes to the offering side of things. Of course, if it's more a service provider or a technology provider, then it's different. Then they want maybe SEB as a customer at some point. So we look into the companies and view them with our glasses, and then we have our colleagues in digital banking, in the various product management areas within the bank that do, of course, their work from, okay, what does the landscape look like within card business, which has been a bit challenged over the years, or within payments, or within, and so on. And then it's more of a matrix solution. It's not very organized, I would say, and I'm not sure if it's good to organize too much. You might kill it if you organize too much. But I think it's important once you decide to. I mean, we have a set structure for us how we decide. It always have to be someone very at the top to decide that yes, we're gonna support Tink. If it's sort of a middle manager who says, I want to do this, it will take a very long time to get it happen. So it has to be someone at the board who actually supports it. I think that's a learning. And also when it comes to the process as such, I mean, Tink was more or less the first one. During the autumn now, we've done a not similar solution, but cooperation with another company. And I made the investment, and it was finalized after the summer. And we can make use a lot of what we learned. I mean, everything was like, okay, so how did we do in Tink? What we did learn from that? Let's talk to the person who was responsible for that part of it, and so on. And also, I'm sure it's the same within in the other banks as well, but to make... if there is a new product, I mean, it's in a way a new product, because even if it's not ours, it's part of our offering. It has to go through a new product approval committee. And the first time they see something like this, they're going to be, no, I'm not sure if we're going to do this. It's too risky. It's I can't assess this, or I'm not used to it. But now the second time we did it, it was so much easier. People were, I mean, only just going from one case to 2 cases. They had learned so much, and they had changed a lot of their idea of, okay, so SEB is actually going to do this more times. We just have to learn. Yeah.
Do you need to get the Finansinspektion with new product approvals as well?
Yeah. If we're, as an investor, if we own more than 10%, there is one type of approval that is needed. And if it's less than 10, it's definitely a quicker one. But it has to be sent in before we can be approved as the owners. But from the owner side, yeah.
Okay, but not from the product side, but a product.
I don't think so.
Not from the product side, no. But I mean, if we launch something, we're going to run it in our own name, basically. That's what we've done so far. And when we do that, the entirety of the functionality we offer will fall under the same principles as we do. They have to face the same compliance. It's funny you should mention this, from a mid-level, trying to get a collaboration working. I tried to do that. It went fairly well. But the thing I think that is very interesting when you speak to FinTechs is that when we speak of compliance issues, they almost answer the question before we have time to ask it. And that I think is really interesting. And on terms of our own organization, I think this more collaboration will require more technical competence from the assessors when approving a new product. And I think that's where we're moving, and we moved quite a lot over these past few years with our technical competence to speed up the approval process.
So when you said the FinTechs respond to the compliance question before you ask, it means that they've now been through the learning curve as well?
I presume so. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that when we listen to a pitch or an idea, if we seem to think that this is a good match, as I was into with our current offer, at least from a channel perspective, then we say GDP, and then they say R, and then they continue, and they obviously already thought about that, especially once they are situated here in the European Union. Mm-hmm. They know that the questions are going to get there. And as we get to know them more and they get to know us more and how we perceive risk, I think it'll just speed up the process over the coming years.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
By the way, have you had positive experiences when you are learning from the FinTechs themselves how to do better compliance?
Yeah, I'd say I'm lucky I don't work in compliance, but I think that the people we work with quite rapidly embrace that, and they need to have a different technical understanding of the inner workings of the function we're about to buy or to invest in or to integrate, and what that will affect. I think it's a different question, depending on what level that application is on. So might go into a little technicalities here, but if it's a background function affecting our core systems, then I think our assessors would need to be very, very particular about assessing that. If we're going to do something like ABN AMRO did, for instance, they white-labeled the Tink application that was already available for consumers and launched that aside from their own application. Of course, compliance will be a very important question there, but as we're not moving into the territory of affecting our core functionality, affecting the way SEB behaves within the financial industry in Sweden and payments especially. Yeah, then I think we can look at it at many different ways, and yeah, our assessors are becoming very, very aware.
To answer this question, I've seen cryptocurrency companies who do a lot better compliance than most banks do. So, and this is, I think, purely because they have a more native access to technology. So they're automating everything, doing, tens of layers of different types of screening that normal banks would ever do. So this is definitely changing. And in terms of onboarding different FinTechs, and what our approach is, as Estonians, we're very pragmatic. So it's numbers in, numbers out. So we look at our core strengths and we look at our weaknesses. So our strengths today are payments in the Eurozone. So we offer that as a service to FinTech. So natural connection for us would be payment companies who don't have access to Euro, for example. And on the other hand, talking about stakeholders and stakeholder commitment and fast tracking the companies in the company, we've had strong support from our board and our majority owners for cryptocurrencies. So we got to do stuff around cryptocurrencies very early on, before other banks were afraid to say the name, and we're using distributed ledger and stuff before that. So this is definitely a must to have. If you want to do something in the FinTech field, you have to have the top level commitment there, definitely.
So you actually bring and please do jump in if you have any questions from the audience. Yeah, let's see. So we take a few.
I have a short question about this FinTech collaboration, and maybe as an example we can use Tink. In Lithuania we often discuss that for banks the benefit from cooperating with FinTech is obvious. For example, in Tink it means better customer engagement, higher customer experience. That means more interactions with customers, more opportunities to probably sell our products to these customers, and that's how we make money. And for FinTech, if Tink is also a side product that offer a service to end customer, what is a business case for them as a standalone? I understand now there are examples of white labeling solutions that they sold it as an IT service to some banks, but I understand they started first of all as a standalone service. So what possible business case is there for them? And if you may answer, are they currently profitable company?
On the profitable side, I'm afraid I can't answer, but in the rest I can. I mean, they ranked up a pretty large user base, around 400,000 individuals. And those 400,000 individuals are pretty active in their application. And like I mentioned, Tink, or like I mentioned before, Tink has the aggregator function, so that can create this kind of holistic view of your economy. So that, in a sense, creates the opportunity for them to be able to actually sell products. So in part what we do with them in their interface is that we place mortgage offers. Whenever they can see that a client is a client we might want to approach with a mortgage offer, we can do that, and they can, of course, in a way benefit from that. But also, their product in itself is quite advanced. It appeals to people who really want to be in charge of their own economy, or their own finance, I should say. And that is the main difference. When we look at technology sharing, we can share their ideas, they can share our ideas on how to go forward. But they can apply it to their segment, and we can apply it to our general segment. And I think they still have the ambition. I mean, I think that when I spoke to them a long time ago, they said, okay, we're going to eliminate you, basically. They want their application to succeed, and I think they will in their segment. I think they will be fairly profitable on that, yeah.
Christina, do you want to comment on that?
Well, maybe more a general comment, but what has dawned upon a lot of, I think, the FinTechs and banks as well, but especially if you're a FinTech with a app, you compete with a lot of other apps. It's the bank app, it's the game app, it's the children's savings app, it's depending on what you do. Maybe it's about 5 apps that you can actually make use of more frequently. So the challenge for if it's Tink or if it's another savings app, or when you target sort of a small segment of your life, then it will be difficult for you to be relevant and be used in that frequency that you would like them, your customer to use your solutions. So I think that's also a reason why it started out some years ago is that FinTechs were going to kill the banks. I mean, that's how it was spoken on. There was a Stockholm Tech Festival some years ago. Then it took some time, and I think today very few say that. It's more that, okay, we will make use of each other, just like you said yourself, that there is a clear reasoning why the banks would like to, because they don't have the resources. If you talk about the legacy banks being stuck in the regulation and the legacy IT infrastructure, hopefully that will change over the years, but that's the fact as of today. But also the FinTechs realize that the banks, they already have, I mean, among the banks, you have all the customers in the country. If you get to sell your solution to that bank, you will access that customer base. And doing that on your own with that sort of small solution, you will definitely reach out to the early adopters. That's what Tink did, and all the other apps that we have in our countries. But to sort of conquer the daily usage of a mobile phone user's app frequency, that's the challenge, and then that's where we will need each other.
Mm-hmm. Now, as we conclude, I'll ask the last question, which is to ask for brief answers. If you look at 2018 and in the coming years, do you see more of the FinTech cooperation being on the consumer side of the service, or on the kind of the backbone or the infrastructure of the banks, and finding ways to collaborate there, maybe between the banks, between the FinTechs, and in all sorts of combinations? So I'll say to all of you.
I think it's a very good question. I think we will move more and more towards, if the first applications has been very much in the consumer space, we're moving more and more into the smaller companies, and also backbone. So I say there would be a more balanced picture as we move along. The speed is difficult to say, but it's definitely moving in that direction, I would say.
Yeah, I can just fully agree on that. And that's also just, we talked about within blockchain, we hope to see like real cases, not only use cases. When it comes to the consumer side of things, we've already seen true cases, but when it comes to more AI and so forth, it's been, I think, a lot of companies or FinTechs, they definitely put that buzzword into when describing their products, but not that many have a true AI function that appeals to the banks. And I would say a lot of banks, of course, work with that themselves already, but more on making use of consultancies and doing their data lakes, where they sort of pour out all the information that they have, in order to make sense of what can we learn about our customers and how can we help them to get smarter. So I think you will definitely see more on that side, and robotics and the backbone and processes.
I think we're going to see a lot of both, very much so. When we look at the spectrum here, I think a lot of companies are working on the back end of things. A lot of them are working on the front end of things. Those who get really much attention are then the companies working in both, where they have a potential use case. And I think that is what we're going to see a lot of, at least from the consumer side where I'm from. Those who approach consumers and can help us with that from a channel perspective. And that's going to be really interesting. I think there's going to be more and more additions to my backlog in elements that will have to be assessed and taken care of in relation to all the other things that is coming from the organization itself and our own initiatives.
Yeah, I have to agree. The consumer way would definitely continue. I think it's really bad to make predictions, but I think that we're also going to start seeing consolidation. So especially in the bank light sector, where if you have a look at the bank lights or application banks that you have in the UK today, the list is incredible. There's no way all of these companies could survive. So they either have to merge or they will be weeded out. The weak ones will disappear, especially if the Brexit happens, for example, in the UK. So there will be some some companies missing soon. I'm predicting. SME wave is very much a hot topic right now, so that will definitely go on. But in terms of corporates, I think this is kind of the most difficult sector because it's very hard to agree on anything between corporations. It's very expensive to change the infrastructure, so I think that will definitely happen, but it will take a longer time and it will be much slower paced. But yeah, this year I'm looking to see some consolidation in consumer area.
Great. So let me thank you. Thank all the panelists for a wonderful discussion.